Hey guys, this is Bharadwaj with FoneArena.com, and this is the Sony Xperia C that we recently unboxed. So this phone is really nicely built, number one, and number two, this is one of the first phones from Sony to sport a MediaTek processor. Yes, the MediaTek quad-core processor that you see on most Indian devices, that's the one that powers this device. And on the back of the phone, sorry about that, on the back of the phone you can also note the 8 megapixel camera unit. So this sits inside a chrome ring, and there's also a single LED flash there. Apart from that, nothing to say. It is based on the XMR sensor that was present in the Sony Xperia Arc. Yes, the exterior Sony Xperia Arc, that's really old. That's the same sensor that sits inside the Xperia C. That's not a really bad thing actually, and we'll tell you why. So this is the user interface here, pretty much typical Sony. So let's open up the camera UI and see how it is. So there you go, that's the camera UI. Pretty typical of all Sony devices to sport a very similar UI. That's not surprising at all. A quick tour to the UI would be from the top. You have the front-facing camera toggle. The front-facing camera, that's not the front-facing camera, that's the camera mode. Sorry about that. This is the front-facing camera. So camera modes at the top, you have normal, video camera, picture effects, sweep panorama, scene selection, front camera, and front video. So talking of the front camera, it's just a 0.3 megapixel VGA camera. It does not take great pictures or video, but it is just used for video calling, so we'll just skip that. So it's in the normal picture mode right now. Over at the left you also have the portrait retouch. This is like the face beautification mode that you see on most devices. You also have the flash, autofill flash and off, and this is the complete settings which we will go through shortly. Over at the top right you have the gallery thumbnail, the shutter button for stills, and the video shutter button. This is the front facing camera toggle. So these are the shortcuts, that's the Android shortcuts overlaid on the UI, so we are not going to touch that. That's about it for the camera UI. So let's go into the settings and see what all we have. So you can change the resolution, you can change the flash, of course. Self-portrait voice guidance is something we saw on Nokia's feature phones, so that similar feature is here too. You also have the focus mode, single autofocus, touch focus, and face detection. So you also have HDR, exposure compensation, quick launch, white balance, ISO metering. So all these are pretty typical of Sony. In terms of cameras, you also have the same options in the Xperia Z1. In fact, you have a lot more, but this is a sized down version, so you also have a sized down version of the camera UI. Pretty featured for a mid-range phone, we would say. You can, considering that you can change the white balance, ISO, and metering on all those phones, you have a bit of extra things like quick launch and, of course, self-portrait voice guidance. So that's about it for the camera UI. Pretty nice UI, considering that this is a mid-range phone. So, talking about the camera performance, this is based on the XMR sensor, as we told already. It's a 8 megapixel camera unit, and it does take decent pictures. We tested out the camera in a lot of conditions, the daylight, macro, low light, and video. So let's take a look at some of the daylight samples now. So as you saw from the samples, the photos came out really well. They are nicely exposed, metered, and even have really nice details, save for some extra post-processing that's happening in terms of edge sharpening and noise reduction. So you can see less of details here in this specific photo, but otherwise we found the camera to do really well. The colors are nicely balanced, and the details are really sharp. So that's one good thing about the Sony Xperia Cs. So now moving on to macro samples. Macro is never really a challenge for most cameras, and the Sony Xperia C is no exception. So take a look at some of these camera samples and see what you can decide for yourself. Oh, based on these camera samples, we would say we are slightly disappointed by the lack of details, we would say, or maybe that's the lack of focus. But we have seen other cameras do pretty well in this department, but the Sony Xperia C does just about well, not great. That's the thing we would say. So now moving on, we also took a couple of low light samples. So take a look at them. So as you can see from the low light samples, there is a lot of color added to the sample. The details might be there. You can see less noise here, but that's the post-processing casting a color, a red color over the photo. So that was the normal mode, and the other photo was the night mode. So both these modes have this color cast, and that's slightly inevitable. Also, we took a photo with flash which overblows the highlights a little bit, but takes a decent photo, good enough for usability. So that's the low light performance for you. Not really great, but not really bad either, because it takes decent shots indoors with a good amount of noise, if you ask. So that's the camera samples, still camera samples of the Sony Xperia C. So let's see how the video samples are. So you can see that while recording the 1080p 30fps video, you can take a 2 megapixel photo out of this frame. That's literally 1920 by 1080. And you can see that not much you can do about the settings in terms of video. So that's one thing we noted, but let's switch to the video camera mode and see what other settings we have. So scenes are just off at night, and you can turn the video light on or off. So that's the video mode. And going into the settings, you can see the similar settings there. You can actually drag and drop these user interface controls on the camera UI. That's one standard feature of Sony's camera UI, which we didn't mention earlier. So anyway, that's all the settings you can use. There is also a software-based image stabilizer and other settings like metering and exposure. So pretty stocked up on settings here too. So take a look at the video camera performance. We shot a sample here. So as you saw from the video sample, it's not that great, but pretty nice for a mid-range phone. Nothing special to say there, nicely detailed, a little bit of colors, but the metering is slightly off and the exposure also. That's about it for the video overview on the Sony Xperia C. Now let's take a quick look at the other modes too. You have picture effects that has a lot of live filters, as you can see here. So these are some things that very normal filters that you see on most phones, and you can notice how laggy the user interface is because of the overlaid 9 modes here. So switching to a mode, again you can see the user interface lag. That's one thing we noted, and also you can quickly change between the settings. So that's the pictures mode here. We'll just get out of the pictures mode and relaunch the camera. So that was the picture effect mode. You also have the sweep panorama that Sony has mastered on its cameras. It works pretty nicely. And then you have scene selection. Scene selection, as usual, is a bunch of point and shoot like modes that you can use, but not really great. But one thing that stands apart from all the other phones is the inclusion of a camera shutter button. So this is a two-step camera shutter button that you see mostly only on Sony Android devices. No other Android device, or in fact most of the Android devices, don't have this, and that's the two-step camera key. The Sony Xperia Z1 brought it back, and the Sony Xperia C now has it. So that's one good thing Sony has done to the Android ecosystem. We really appreciate that from Sony. So that's about it for the camera review. Overall, we think it's a pretty decent camera for the price. It takes decent stills, it takes decent videos, but maybe it can do better in low light. It does have the post-processing artifacts that you see on most devices, but we think for a mid-range device, that's sort of expected. So anyway, we hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, do hit the like button and do hit the subscribe button for more videos like these. Thanks for watching and let us know what you think in the comment section below.